what is your perceived area of expertise? Is that where you started the podcast around? Or did you have a life before you started the podcast, and then from there you started the show and you kind of tried to go away from your perceived area of expertise? Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. It was episode number 79, the 5 main focuses for maximum podcast growth in 2024. Hopefully you're off to a strong start to the year. Today, for episode number 80, 2 important understandings for making money with your podcast. We've kind of touched on this in other episodes, but I wanted to dedicate an entire episode, and we might have done, I might have done almost an entire episode, but I felt like it was time. I know we're going to have maybe a new / different audience as we start in the new year, because a lot of people are going to start podcasts in 2024. So I want to make sure I touch on this. When I talk to people and I say, hey, what are the few things that you're struggling with? What are the few areas of improvement you have? Where can I add value? It's usually more listens, more listeners, or monetizing. Those are usually the big 3. And what I've seen is most people have a really good idea of how to monetize short term, but they don't have an understanding of how to turn their podcast into an actual business. And I didn't either in the beginning. The short term thing is ads and sponsorships. And you've heard me say this so often. The reason I say it is because it's the easiest thing to do. But oftentimes, the easiest thing to do is not what other people are doing in order to get to the levels of success that they are. Right now, Buzzsprout that's the host we use and a lot of our clients use. I'm not affiliated with them. I don't get any money for saying that. I just like the platform. It's very easy to use. The data's really good when it comes to tracking. I like the platform. They are offering, I believe, 1.4 cents per download. So let's just say every download, you get a penny. So if you get 100 downloads, that's $1. If you get 1,000 downloads, that's $10, and so on. If you're getting 1,000 downloads per episode, then you're going to make, and say you're doing 4 episodes a month, you're going to make $40 a month, right? So realistically, it's not going to be sustainable income. Now, if you're doing this and you say, well, it costs me $40 for this service and Zoom is $15 a month and this, I just like to make $100 a month and I'd be happy with that. Sure. Ads and sponsorships might be the way. A lot of platforms have built-in ways to run ads now. It's easier than ever. But if you want to do this to the place where eventually you could make this your side hustle and then eventually maybe make this your full-time gig, number one, it's going to take a meaningful amount of time. I always like to put that out there. I don't think there are any secrets. I don't think there are any tips, tricks that I'm going to tell you that are going to make you do this overnight. I think that would be lying. I really do. So that's just not the approach I take. It's going to take a meaningful amount of time. But the other thing that I think is really important to talk about is there are 2 understandings. 1, monetizing your audience directly. 2, using your perceived area of expertise to make money from your podcast. So you've definitely heard me mention this in the past. I had this happen recently. Someone I had just started working with this person. They said, I've never made any money with my podcast. And I said, all right, let's reframe that. Have you ever made money from something that you never would have made money from if it wasn't for the podcast? And they said, no, you know what? Actually, as a matter of fact, yeah, I have. I said, okay, you've monetized your podcast. It might not feel like it. Just because it's not directly from the podcast does not mean it's not from the podcast. That's important. That's very, very important for me to say, because I know a lot of us are trying to think of, I spent $50 this month on the podcast. I didn't make any money from my episodes. Nobody reached out directly. But we have to understand that the podcast is about leverage as much as anything else. So here are really the 2 important understandings. 1 is monetizing your audience. 2 is using a perceived area of expertise to make money. Let's do it this way. I work with a podcaster who has a podcast that's all about tips, tricks, tools, lessons, experiences, inspiration, stories from people who work from home. They work for themselves from home. This person is an entrepreneur, has been an entrepreneur for a decade, I believe, has been working for themselves for a decade. And they said, I'd like to start a podcast about how to be better at working from home. Awesome. Sounds like a great podcast. But this person doesn't coach people who work from home. This person isn't going to write a book most likely on how to work from home effectively. This person doesn't have a monetizational, is that a thing? Monetizable? Whatever word I should use, monetizable. They don't have a monetizable way directly from their audience in their niche, but they are a website designer. Your audience are entrepreneurs. All entrepreneurs need websites. That is the way you're going to monetize your podcast. It doesn't have to be from ads and sponsorships. It has to be from turning the business that you already have into a connective point to the podcast. The podcast becomes lead gen for the business you already have. This has been a really telling thing because I've worked with a lot of people who are really, really successful in real life, and then they leave these jobs or occupations of success to start a personal brand, and it's really hard to get the personal brand running. So I always say, how can we connect the personal brand, your new life, with your old life, your old professional life? One of our clients owned an orthodontics practice, ended up starting a podcast that was about happiness and being more happy in your life, in your day-to-day life, in your business life, in your relationships, just understanding you're going to work really, really hard, but you also have to make time for happiness. This person wanted to do coaching through the podcast directly for the audience. My suggestion was we should probably coach people who will look at the success you have created with the orthodontics and the dentistry. That will probably give you a head start. Then you'll have credibility. You'll have social proof, you'll have testimonials, and then eventually you'll be able to actually coach your podcast audience. So let me break it down. And again, I like to be transparent. I think it's important. Also, if you listen to Next Level you know my chair is broken and it just randomly throws me backwards at random times throughout when I'm speaking. So if you hear me or see me be very jarred, it's because my chair is trying to throw me over and put my legs over my head. I like to be very honest and transparent with this because I think it's important. So last year with Next Level You, our business grew, I think it grew like 20% or 25%, something like that. I would say 30% of our money that we made in the business came from our audience. So the listeners of Next Level University. 70% of the money came from people who do not listen to our podcast at all, but they like the results we have and they want us to help them get those results. So Next Level Podcast Solutions is a big one. We have 50 some odd clients. Those are all podcasts that we produce every single month. And we also have Next Level Social Media, where we do people's social media for them. The only reason we are able to do that and charge money for it is because of the credibility of our podcast. Now, if we wanted to just monetize from our audience, could we do it? Yes. Would it be the same as it is? No, probably not. It would be very, very, very different. Alan has my business partner, his coaching business is a 6-figure business. So you can definitely make a meaningful amount of money from serving your audience. 100%. If that's what he was doing and we weren't building a business, he would have a 6-figure business from coaching. But that's based on the fact that he is a high-level business coach and we have so many episodes. In the beginning, my challenge to you would be, what is your perceived area of expertise that will give you enough credibility to start coaching or start serving in a different way? We all have something that we're really, really good at that people would already pay us for. Now, again, I understand these are probably challenging episodes because maybe you don't want to coach. This goes the same with courses. Maybe it's group coaching. Maybe it's books, maybe it's that type of stuff. I like the coaching model because I think it's the best way to make a meaningful amount of money, and it's the best way to serve people at the deepest level. You're literally talking to the people who are listening to your show, adding value to their lives. If we want referrals, if we want testimonials, if we want people to share the podcast, one of the best ways to do it is just to add more value at the bottom of the business. So these are the two really important understandings are, one, making money directly from your audience is great because you're going to get to know them at a deeper level. It's one of those things that it's not just about the money. Yes, the money is good and you can do this as a side hustle and hopefully eventually as your full-time gig. But you're talking to the audience directly. You're getting to know their problems at a deeper level. You're serving them. You're getting testimonials. You're building your confidence as a coach. You know what episodes are going to hit better. There's so many reasons to coach. Where if you're just running ads or sponsorships, if you get less listens this month than you did last month, you're going to make less money. You have no idea how your audience feels about ads and sponsorships. If you go look at some of the big shows that got big and then started running ads and sponsorships, look at the reviews. A lot of the later reviews or the most recent reviews are people complaining about how many ads there are. Now, will that continue to trend that way? No, I think as people get used to ads, they'll be okay with it. But I just don't think it's a meaningful way for most of us to make enough money. There's YouTube streamers that make a lot of money, but for every one of those, there's probably 1,000 people who don't have enough influence or don't have a big enough audience to monetize that way. I would rather you start monetizing the other way so you don't ever have to run ads or sponsorships, or you can do that just because you choose to, not from a place of necessity. So when we first started the podcast, 2017, we started Next Level University. I left my job in 2018 because I was miserable. I was suicidal. It was a very, very rough time in my life. Didn't make any money for a year and a half, 2 years. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was at least a year before we ever made any money. I started coaching people on mindset for free. Our podcast was very mindset, self-improvement, habits, that type of stuff, relationships. That's what I started coaching people on. But I started coaching for free because I didn't really have the credibility yet. I didn't have the credibility where somebody was just going to give me money. I coached 5 clients for 2 months and said, hey, I can't do this for free anymore. What do you think of $50 a week? $50 an hour really is what it was. Everybody said yes. From there, as the demand started to grow, I could raise my pricing. So 50 went to 75, 75 went to 100, 100 went to 150. And then that's when we started building other pieces of the business. But you can see 3 years in, 4 years in, if you build an audience and you have free offerings and you're talking to your audience on social media and you're building these relationships, you could get to the place where you're charging $97 for a coaching session.
Hi, my name's John Laurito, and I just wanted to give a big shout out to Kevin Palmieri. I had reached out to him. He had been referred to me when I had shared with a friend of mine some interest in doing a podcast. And he said, you've got to use Kevin. He's fantastic. He's the best around. He'll get you started and off the ground and soaring high in no time. And take it from somebody who knows nothing about podcasting other than maybe saying a few things. But as far as behind the scenes, the startup, everything, I knew nothing. Kevin was phenomenal in terms of leading me through the whole process, and not just easy to work with, but really, really knows his stuff. A great combination between leading me through all the stuff I had no idea what I was doing, but also really listening to me and understanding what it was I was trying to accomplish and what my vision is. So whether you're looking for somebody to help you and get you started, or somebody, as I've done, where I'm putting it entirely in his hands because I've got total trust and confidence in him, and he is a true pro and easy to work with, any of those ends of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of success and a lot of fun working with Kevin. Trust me. Thanks.
And think about it. You don't really need that many clients. If you had 5 clients a week, you're making $500 a week, you're making $2,000 a month, you're making $24,000 a year. That's a really good start. And that's 5 clients. So all you really need is 5 clients and you coach them every single week. All right? Hypothetically, if you wanted to do that. There's a lot of ways to do it. I just don't want to see you try to do the sponsorship ad route, realize that it's just not as much money as you expected, and then you think to yourself, I can't make money now. Because all you have to do is do to a degree what I'm saying. I know it's not that easy. But your perceived area of expertise. What is your perceived area of expertise? Is that where you started the podcast around? Or did you have a life before you started the podcast, and then from there you started the show and you kind of tried to go away from your perceived area of expertise? Not everybody starts with the thought of turning into a business. If I was a airline pilot, I should probably start a podcast about being an airline pilot. If I was a personal trainer, I should probably start a podcast about fitness, health, nutrition, personal training. In an ideal world, that's the way it would work. But sometimes you have to find creative ways to make money from other avenues in life. And that, I know I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point, but I just want to make sure that lands. In the beginning, if you have 15 episodes, it might be hard to get someone to work with you based on what you talk about on your podcast. But it doesn't mean you can't use that credibility elsewhere. Let's say you have a podcast that has 15 episodes. And let's say you have, I don't know, what's a good number? Let's say you have 500 listens. 15 episodes, 500 listens, okay? If you can get on another podcast about what you talk about on your podcast or something else in your life that you talked about, or you have a perceived area of expertise, you can make money from doing that. And the reason you're able to get on that podcast is because you have a podcast. The podcast is a leveraging tool as much as anything else. We would never have gotten the speeches we have gotten if we didn't have the podcast. Now, have we done 1 million speeches? No, but we never would have gotten paid thousands of dollars to speak if it wasn't for the podcast, because a podcast listener heard it and then suggested to someone at their company. It never would have worked if we didn't have the podcast. So that is my main focus with this episode. Let me just make sure I touched on everything. This is one I took a couple notes just because I wanted to make sure. All right. I would say in an ideal world, you would have a multifaceted approach to your podcast where you have business to consumer, and then maybe eventually you have business to business. Business to consumer is you to your audience, most likely, if your audience aren't business owners necessarily. Business to business is you helping people who want the same result you've gotten in your business. So I have clients that, let's say I have one on the top of my head. I know he listens all the time. Shout out to Philip. Philip has a podcast that's all about nutrition, health, fitness, getting results. He coaches people and trains people on nutrition, health, fitness, and getting results. Eventually, down the line, Philip may end up coaching coaches on how to get clients. That's a very real possibility. Philip might do more corporate gigs where he goes in and speaks to companies. That's not necessarily his podcast audience. It's somebody completely different, but the podcast became the brand that allowed him to do it. So if we take nothing from this episode, let's just take this one sentence. Turning your podcast into a brand is the best long-term way to make money with it. And again, to serve the audience. This episode's obviously about monetization. You're not going to make money with your podcast if you don't serve an audience, and if you're not getting better at what you do. But it might not be the person who's listening on the other end of the phone that ultimately gives you money. It's not always how it works. You'd be surprised, right? Like I said, maybe 30% of the money we made in our business last year was people who listened to our podcast. 70% are, some of these people have never heard our podcast, but I was able to go on their podcast because of our credibility, right? My perceived area of expertise is not necessarily mindset anymore. It's not necessarily peak performance anymore or habits. One of my perceived area of expertise is podcasting. So it's different. It would probably be harder for me to get a client from our podcast than if I just go on somebody else's podcast and try to add value to their life. Right? Now, again, we have 1,500 episodes, so it's different. But I just want you to see that. It doesn't have to be the straight line of they listen, they do this, they do this, they do this, and eventually I work with them. That doesn't have to be how it is. There are other ways that will present themselves in enough time. That's my main focus on today. My apologies if today's was kind of all over the place, feeling a bit under the weather, not feeling so hot. So I think I have a little bit of a brain fog going on. But that's really the thought. There are really two ways. It's through your audience or using the credibility that you've built from adding value to your audience that is going to ultimately allow you to monetize your podcast. Now, last thing, and disclaimer, if you want to do ads, let's just say ads for the sake of this, I don't want to dissuade you from doing that. I just want you to know that it might be harder than you think to make money doing it that way, or a meaningful amount of money. The example we used earlier is if you want to make $100 a month, you could get 10,000 listens or whatever the number would be. 1,000 would be $10. Yeah, 10,000 listens would get you $100 a month. Or you could get one client who pays you $25 a week. And there you go. You have the same amount of money. Yes, one requires your time, but it's also a far higher likelihood of happening. All right. Hopefully that wrapped up nicely and made sense. If not, again, any questions you ever have, you can either shoot me an email, kevin@nextleveluniverse.com. That's my main email, or my handle on Instagram is neverquitkid. Any questions that come up, shoot me a message, shoot me an audio. If you want to be brave, shoot me a video. I love those. But I know that everybody's experience, everybody's position, everybody's day-to-day, everybody's goals are completely different. So maybe what I'm saying resonates with you in a certain way. It might resonate with you in a different way 6 months from today. But the ultimate thought here, just to drive the point home one more time, there's inline money and then there's separate money. Inline is directly from the podcast. This person listened, reached out, said they want to work with me. Separate is any opportunities outside of that, but also it could be a completely different area of expertise that allows you to work with someone and monetize that way, thus making your other business more successful, increasing your credibility, and then increasing the opportunity to make business or make money and grow the business within the business. So I know that's a lot. There's a lot going on there. As always, if you feel stuck, if you want an extra pair of eyes on something, if you want to talk about improving your speaking, if you want to talk about how to title your episodes, if you want me to look at the data in terms of how many downloads and all that happy jazz you have for your podcast, please book a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. The link will be in the show notes as always. Next week for episode number 81. My goodness. One practice that really helped my confidence with speaking. I'm always nervous when I do any episodes on speaking because anytime I mess up during the episode, it's kind of saying I'm not that good of a speaker. So I'm always nervous when I do those. But this is a simple practice. It takes a minute a day, and it's something that really, really helped me over the course of maybe a year. It was a dramatic difference that I noticed, and Alan noticed, and a lot of people around me noticed. So I will share that with you next week. As always, I hope the new year is off to a strong start. I hope your headphones are ringing. I hope all your technology is working. I hope your lighting is not giving you headaches because you're sitting in front of it too often. I hope your ideal audience is self-identifying. I hope you know more now about monetization than you did before. And I hope you're crushing it. I always hope you're crushing it. Until next week, keep on podcasting, and we will talk to you